All right, cool. So I think with that, maybe we'll open it up here. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they would like to walk through today?
I do.
I always do.
Oh, go ahead, Sandy.
Well, I'm often first, so you can go first.
Okay, so I'm wanting to do a query of all of the objects in an org and their sharing settings. And I was able to query the objects, but not only the objects. It gave me a list of like way too many things, and I want to narrow that down to just the objects. Do you know how to do that in a SOQL query?
Yeah, let me say that back to you. So you want to query all the sharing settings. So when you say sharing settings, is that like the individual share records for a record, or are you talking more of like that sharing settings screen where you see all the like sharing rules and all that kind of stuff?
Um, so let me see if I can, basically the org-wide defaults where you can see public read write, the
Okay.
internal and the external. So I have that. It came out in the query. But I don't know how to narrow down my list. Let's see, the name of the column. I think it's the developer name.
Yeah.
It's giving me too much.
Okay. Do you have that existing query that you tried that you might be able to share? And I can pull that up in my org.
Let me see.
And just while you're doing that, and hopefully my two-factor authentication won't take 20 minutes here. Here we go. Okay, so while you're doing that, I did want to show just one thing when it comes to sharing or just querying in general, and that is right here. So whenever I'm trying to figure out an object in Salesforce, and if I don't know the name of the object, this is usually the page that I start with. It's an object reference for the Salesforce platform. So if you're not sure of an object and you generally have an idea of a word that might be in that object, like share, this is where I would go, and I would just start with typing in the word share. And then you can start to see if there's any objects that have that name in there. Now, if you didn't know that, I can go back here. If we go down the reference, this is where you start to see like owner sharing rules and things like that. It might give you a good place to start when you're trying to just develop these queries. But that said, let me actually go into your query here and see if we can give this a whirl. So I'm going to go to Trailhead. I'm going to open up one of my hands-on orgs. Hopefully they haven't expired. And let's see. Okay, so I was able to log in. And if we go into the sharing settings page, this is what we were talking about earlier. So sharing settings. And this is where we see all of our, private, public rewrite, all that. So is this the data that you're trying to get back or something else?
It's that, but only for the, so let me give you an example of what I'm seeing too much of.
I'll open up developer console too. Just run this query.
Okay.
All right. So if I go to query editor, we paste that in, execute. Okay. So we get all the different objects in Salesforce and their external and internal sharing. Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Like the Apex log, I don't need an Apex log.
So you're just trying to limit the
definition.
number of objects that actually get returned in this query?
Yes, like I guess I'm thinking just the objects. Like some of these I didn't even know were objects. I just thought that they were. I don't know what I thought they were.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to get a list of the objects that we have been changing the settings on for the client so that I can send him an easy to read list and make sure that the settings meet his expectations, and he can, I don't know, put a check mark next to it in an Excel sheet and say, oh no, this one needs to be private.
Yeah. So, okay. Now, a few things here. There may be an easier way to do that, but before I get to that, let's just take a look at one other thing here. So this is the the entity, what is this thing? Entity definition. Here, let me just grab this here. All right, what other fields are in this? So we got ID, developer name, labels. Okay, there's quite a bit in here. All right. So, okay, in any case, yeah. So you get this big list. You only want the stuff that you're working on or that you've changed. I'm curious, have you tried to do this via the setup audit trail?
No.
Okay, so let me just to run a test here. If I go into our sharing settings for this org and whatever the, let's just see, I don't know, the work order object, I'm going to change this to public read only. And let's just do the object we know, like we're going to change external access for leads to public read write. And before we click save, this is a good consultant tip, but if you work on multiple customer orgs or multiple Salesforce orgs, before you make that very serious change, always look at your My Domain and make sure you're not still logged into your customer org. So this is my Trailhead org. So I'm going to click save here. So that'll apply the changes. And then what we can do now, this is where the big mystery is. Does that change get recorded in the setup audit trail? And let's see. Yeah. So there we go. So I changed the default internal access for work order from private to public read write or public read only, right? So what we could do then is if we download this setup audit trail, and okay, so it comes up here. So if I open up Excel, it has a type column. So if you wanted to clean this up, so I'm just going to format as table. My thing has headers. And then if we look at this section, if I just, restrict this just to sharing defaults, it gives you kind of a nice table of what has changed, from what to what on which object. So benefit of this is, it's only going to show stuff that you've actively changed. So it's going to weed out all that other kind of junk that's in there. And then of course you can clean this up. Like if there's some stuff that's here that you don't want to share with them, to go through the checklist and mark off. It's Excel. So we just come in here and just delete the stuff you don't want to share, or that might not be relevant to what you're trying to share with them, and go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I think for our purposes, though, a side-by-side list of just so he can see at a glance, even the things that we have not changed,
Yeah.
To see if he wants them to remain so is really my concern.
Yeah.
So can you do it with the tooling API? That I saw an article on that, but I don't understand that enough to know if that's an option for this case.
Well, it might be an option, but again, I guess whatever you want to exclude from this list, there has to be some kind of criteria that we can look at, to exclude it. So whether you're doing it through a query or through some other API, you're going to get a giant list unless you say don't include something, right? So when you look at all the fields that exist on this object, that's kind of what I was doing here, is kind of scanning through here and just to see, is there some type of field that's on here that we might be able to query or to restrict this result set and only include the stuff that might be relevant that he wants to see. So maybe one that you could look at is like the record types. Like if an object doesn't support record types, chances are it's like some kind of back-end object that you probably don't care about. So
Okay.
if I here, let me just do this. I'm going to copy this. Let's just throw that down here. And I'm going to throw where, and I have actually no idea what record type supported is. So before I actually add that to my query here, or into my where clause, let's just throw that in there to see what it looks like when it comes back. Let's see, select blah, 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 blah from entity. Okay, and of course that's some kind of complex result. So that's not really something we can query on, but let's sort this by type and let's see what we have as like true false here. Is triggerable. So again, that's one that could weed out a whole bunch of stuff. So let's just say where is triggerable equals true. Okay, so slightly smaller list, I think 197 to 816, right? So is triggerable, meaning that they're objects that as a user, you're allowed to create triggers and flows and things like that on. So that could weed out a few. We go back to this and look, see what other fields is replicatable, retrievable, searchable. Let's see, is layoutable. So again, when we think about like, can we remove certain system objects? That might be one, because if it's not something you would display in a layout, then typically it might not be something that you would care to include, right? So, and is layoutable. Is that right? Yeah. Equals true. Okay, so 105. So that gets to a little bit more workable.
Okay. Yeah, that's
So,
great. Thank you.
So maybe looking at that, I don't know if there's going to be like a, a solve everything kind of solution here, but maybe looking through these and, or even just including them in your query and pulling them into Excel, and then you can start working in Excel to narrowing out all the different stuff you don't need. Now, how are you exporting this? Are you trying to do this through Developer Console, or are you trying to do it through another tool that you could?
I was doing it through the that extension. What is this? Salesforce Inspector.
Okay.
I did it through the Developer Console as well, just to see, but the Salesforce Inspector just quickly puts it into an Excel sheet.
Okay. Yeah, because what I was going to say is, if you didn't have that, the other way you might be able to do it is through Workbench. So if folks are not familiar with Workbench, if I just jump back into here and we go to workbench.developerforce.com. So in theory, I should be able to log in here. It might log me into my like production org. Yeah, that's my production org. But in any case, if we go into SQL query, I should be able to just paste this query in here, get some results, so you can confirm, it is what you want it to be. And then instead of pulling this into a list, you can just pull this into a bulk CSV file, hit query, and then once it's finished doing the bulk query, it'll actually give you a little download link, and you can pull it into Excel or whatever else you need. So either the tool like Megan mentioned, like a Salesforce Inspector, or something like Workbench, one way or another, you should be able to export this. And I guess because that's a complex type, we're not going to be included in our query. So let's just do that again. And there you go. So now you can download this and pull it into Excel. All right.
Oh, thank you. Could you just actually repaste your new query into chat?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I gotta find out where the chat went. Okay, here we go. Okay, there's the query. And then for folks that are not familiar with Workbench, this is definitely a fun tool to play with. So put that link there as well. Okay, so I know that didn't fully answer your question, but I think, going through the different fields that are available, maybe sorting by the type and looking at those Boolean fields where you could start saying, where it is layoutable or it is triggerable. And again, before this call, I had no idea what is layoutable. I didn't even know that existed, but you can kind of look at the name of these things and try to figure out like what they mean. So like, is layoutable? Well, can you put it on a layout, right? So you can start to think about what are the different things you might include to exclude like system-based objects,
Thank you.
So,
It narrows down my list greatly.
All right, cool. All right. So any questions on that or any other questions? We'll open it up. I see a hand raised.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
So one of our fun things we got recently is we had inactivated a user, and then we started getting errors for developer script exception, inactive user, Apex script unhandled. So basically what I figured out is that these scheduled jobs were created and by this particular inactive user.
Yeah.
So now it's failing. So is there any way to fix that without literally just deleting them and recreating them?
Yeah, that is a great question. I have absolutely no idea, but we can try to figure that out real quick. So if we go into setup, for those that aren't familiar, what we're talking about here is the scheduled job screen. And you can do this from the Apex classes screen as well. But essentially, this is a list of all the different scheduled jobs that we have. Now, what I'm going to do, because this Trailhead org doesn't really have anything, I'm going to pause my share. I'm going to jump into my org very quickly, hide all this secret squirrel stuff here, and then go from here. So I know I got a whole bunch of scheduled stuff in my org. So assuming that this renders, and assuming you guys can still hear me because Verizon has been killing me all week here.
I hear you.
Okay, so there we go. So if we go to scheduled jobs, if you're in an active production org that's got scheduled reports and dashboards and everything else, this is where you can see when everything is scheduled for. All right, so some of these here, you notice we have is scheduled Apex. So the question is, if you had a user that actually scheduled this job, like we look at the submitted by, that is no longer with the company, their account was deactivated, how do you address that? How do you switch it to the new administrator? So one thing that I've seen people do, and I think this is the bad idea, is to not reschedule or not change it at all. And they'll just change the email address on that existing user to somebody who's still there and just keep that account active to run their scheduled jobs. Bad idea, waste of license, not really good for keeping track of what's going on in your work. So to your question then, for this, how would I actually change this? Like I said, I have no idea.
Well, and some of them don't have that manage button on it either. Like not all of them have a manage option.
Yeah, I think the ones that don't have the manage, these might be from other, like, for example, I have a bunch of Pardot ones
Mhm.
that I can't manage. You can delete them. And then to your point, you'd have to recreate them.
Right.
All right, let's think here.
I do like coming up with the interesting ones for you, don't I?
Yeah. Well, like while I'm fumbling through this, does anybody have a thought on this? Has anybody run into this issue before and have a solution? Okay. All right. So let's look here.
I did submit a ticket to, because one of them is through a manage package. So I submitted a ticket to them to see if they had any solutions as well, but I only just did that a little bit ago. So I don't.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple that are like, so yeah, I was just trying to like figure out where it is and how, like where it was created, all that kind of stuff too is fun.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can figure this out. So change the running user on a scheduled Apex job. How to change submitted user for Apex scheduled jobs. Seems it's not possible. Exact same problem. Deleted them and recreated them. That sounds sad.
Yeah, but that's from 2015.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I don't think that's. You would think that this has changed in the last 7 years, but then again,
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, if you go through the ID Exchange, sometimes that doesn't always hold true. Okay, this is another old one. Delete existing, schedule it again. Again, that sounds pretty sad, like a sad way to do it.
Right, that's the only answer I was really saying too. So
Reddit to the rescue here. Yeah, you never know what to find on some of the Reddit threads. I mean, you might find the solution, or you might find them, insulting your family members or whatever it is here. So, okay, yeah. So I don't know if we're going to find an easy solution here, but let me just see what Salesforce object are scheduled jobs. Scheduled jobs cron trigger object. Okay. So again, I'm coming into this just dorking around and trying to figure it out. But let's just if we open up the cron trigger. Okay, and this is, let's just see, do we see anything that looks remotely like the person that scheduled it? Cron expression, state, start.
Created by ID?
Could be. And I'm guessing if that's a created by ID, we're not going to be able to change that. But
well, so the one, hold on.
Okay, yeah, this looks like my list. So just to see, can we figure out what is Apex versus reports and whatnot just by looking at these columns? Maybe not. Okay, so what we can do then is, if we go back into this, copy that link just for fun, paste it here. So you can't really get to the ID of what the job is.
If you go to Apex jobs, you can get the Apex job ID from there.
So that would be for the jobs that have already run the like, or is that? Yeah,
well, right now I'm looking at all the failed ones. So hold on, let me open it. Yeah, it looks like these are all completed ones, but that's where I got the error. So that was how I was able to find.
Yeah. So what we can do, this actually is pretty helpful, right? So for example, if this batch job, if we're trying to figure out what schedule this is related to, if I just grab that job ID, I do know what this table is. So if we go in here, we're looking for the async Apex job table. And I should be able to pick the Apex. Let's see. Is there like a cron trigger ID? Yeah, let's look at that. Where ID is equal to this. And okay, so that represents that row. And of course, there's no cron trigger ID. Parent job ID, maybe? Nope. Okay. Method name, number of errors, process. Yeah, the class ID is not going to help us. Job type. Yeah, I honestly don't know, Sandy, if there's an easy way to do this besides deleting them and recreating them. Okay. And again, for some of them, it's nice because you have the manage link there, which you might be able to make a change and then save, and it might switch it to the person that did that. But for the ones where you actually have to delete them and recreate them, I don't think there's going to be a great way around that. And again, unless anybody has familiarity with this, if
there's a suggestion in the chat from Gerald.
Oh, let me take a look here. Let's see, Gerald. Oh, Gerald. Okay. Can you somehow recreate, undelete the user, then freeze the account? Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to like leaving the user active in one way or another. I don't know.
We did talk about just kind of recreating that particular account, because this is basically somebody else's org that we just manage. So it's not like we all have our own individual licenses anyway. So
right. How many, just curious, how many jobs are in this kind of state?
Well, of the ones that failed after we tried to inactivate her, it looks like there are
400 jobs.
No, for the ones that failed yesterday and today, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, but some of them are the same ones, I think. The part that's a little confusing for me at this point, being relatively new, it gives me the Apex class, and when I click on that, it doesn't really seem to help me figure out what exactly it is and how to recreate what this job is. Yeah. So I guess that would be the next step is, okay, if I have to rewrite the job, how do I know what the job is in order to recreate it?
Yeah, I think that's where this slightly ugly but kind of helpful cron trigger would help you do, right? So if you were going to just try to get a list of all the different things you had scheduled and then how you would schedule them, like what the triggering mechanism is, this is where that cron expression might come in handy. And this is definitely one that I don't think that we can go and walk through the details of cron expressions, but that's definitely, with this information that you have here, you should be able to recreate, the individual schedules. I just want to see though, I thought that I would see the Apex class here, but cron job detail ID. Yeah, maybe not. This one might be Here you go, cron job detail. Okay, there you go. So for the ID, and then here's the kind of nice name that you would see in your list. So maybe a combination of that with this. Yeah, I don't know. I think I might have to do some homework on this one. I'm not 100% sure how you would go about doing that, besides just manually going in and rescheduling the classes through the Apex classes window.
Right.
And here, just to, I'm sorry, I meant to say this, but again, for those that might not be familiar with, how would you even schedule a class? If you go into setup and you go to Apex classes, you'll notice that there's a button here for schedule Apex. So if you click on that, this is where it's going to ask you, what do you want to call the thing? What class is it that you actually want to schedule? And then this is where you can kind of develop the, what the schedule should be. So, just Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, somewhere around, 4 a.m. I want to run whatever class. The only ones that should show up here, or you would think would show up here, are the schedulable ones, but I don't know if that's the case in this old classic lookup window, if you didn't notice that. But in any case, you could select that class, give it a name, and then when you save that, that would add it to the schedule. So this is where you actually go to do those schedules. But changing them once you already have them in place when a user gets deactivated, I think that's something I'd have to kind of look into in a little bit more detail. All right. Sandy, sorry, I don't have a great answer for you.
Sometimes it just makes me feel better knowing that it's not as simple as I think it should be when, you kind of get stuck on doing the research and you keep seeing the same thing over and over again. And you're just like, you finally talk to somebody who has a lot more experience than you and they're like, yeah, I don't know either. And you're like, yes, I'm not that bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a great way to do it except just delete them and then recreate them. And then, if you do that programmatically, delete the existing ones and recreate them, then that's like step one into creating a tool that would do this. And then you put it on the App Exchange, you make a couple of million, and then 10%, because we first discussed it on office hours, would come my way. And then, yeah.
Fair enough. Sounds fair to me.
All right. So again, my apologies. We couldn't do that one.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the one I slacked you about as well. We did have to, Salesforce had to do something for us in order to get the optimizer to show up.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Well, let's open it back up. I see, Connor, you had your hand raised. Is something you wanted to go through?
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough time for it, but I've working on an integration with Square, a pay service, right? And I've set up a webhook on Square's site and a listener on Salesforce. And as long as I don't add the secret key, I'm getting 200 responses and everything's working all fine and dandy. But as soon as I try and set up the secret and encode it and decode it in my Apex, I'm getting errors. And I think it's obviously related to how I've got the keys set up, but I'm not sure exactly if I'm doing it correctly or if I've got something else going on.
Okay. And the secret key that's generated on the webhook side, right? So you're getting that from Square?
Right.
Okay. And then you're trying to use, there's a specific Apex methods, if I'm not mistaken, about how to actually use those keys within your code, right?
Yes.
Have you created the, there's like 3 different things and I always get them confused, but like the named credential or the connected app or whatever that is, where you actually put the secure key details in?
I have created the name credential. Right now, I'm not using it. I'm just using a straight string to test that way.
So I think that might be where you need to look at, because I don't know. My understanding was to use secret keys within Apex, you actually had to use, and again, I might be getting them confused, but it's either named credentials or remote site settings or whatever the other one is. I can never remember the 3 of them, but I think you have to do it that way. And then in your Apex, you're actually referencing that credential versus just using it directly through the string.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's where I might start. And let me just see real quick. It's just so infrequently that I use these, I can never remember it. And after I got my certification, I immediately, I guess, brain dumped that. But what would it be? So using secret key in Apex, what is the actual thing here? I get the value of secret key in Apex code, platform encryption, decrypt. Let's see. Okay, well, let me actually share my screen so you guys aren't just looking at me with a confused face. So if I go in here, so I thought it was named credentials. So that's URL, that's what certificates. Okay, and then there's, let's see, I think it is actually, so if it's not remote site settings, then there's only one other option that it could be. Okay, yeah, so I don't think it's that.
Custom settings.
No, it wouldn't be custom settings. It's actually, I want to say it's connected apps. Let's just see. So if you go in the app manager, I believe this is where I'm thinking. So all settings, SAML, and I thought there was the key management in here as well. Yeah, I'm really coming up short today. Maybe I'm already on like vacation here. That's what it is.
What are you looking for again?
So basically, where would you store your secret key in Salesforce so that you can then reference it within your Apex class? And again, it's just, I don't do this often. Secret key.
I haven't seen it stored. I've seen like your key come if you do a request to update. What is it? Hold on a second.
Thought I was already here. Let's just see.
Real quick, Blackthorn then sent us a link to a Salesforce article about fixing the owners or the user IDs for the those job things that I was asking about. I haven't tried it yet, but
Nice.
I put the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Good old Blackthorn. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
it's not just Blackthorn that we're getting the error from. We just figured they'd be the easiest person to ask since it's a managed package and they're pretty good.
Are you using it in conjunction with PandaDoc?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are you using it in conjunction with PandaDoc or?
No, it's just that there's a couple of different things that she set up with different related or things that I don't even think are related to each other. So we just figured if we can get an answer from them, we could probably take care of all of them.
Gotcha. Yeah, we had a lot of issues with Blackthorn at my other company where we used it. It was always a pain.
Yeah. So Connor, like you said, I don't think this is one that we'll probably figure out on this call. But I think it has something to do with the fact that you need to have that name credential or whatever that piece is connected before you can actually do it from or use that key within your class. But again, I'm just not definitely not the expert on that one.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And let's just see if we go back here. Sandy, that was the Salesforce help link that you shared?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a look at that. Salesforce billing area and active owner. Okay, so let's just very quickly share that. All right, several ways to do this. New admin can clone all the active schedules. Okay, you can clone them. I don't know how to do that.
I don't know how to do that either. That's what happened.
On the list view for invoice scheduler, change owner. Okay, and this seems like this is Salesforce billing. Okay, so this is like tied into Salesforce billing or CPQ or something like that.
Well, so that might not actually work.
Yeah,
For this
and freeze
particular
user use from logging in. Temporary solution. Okay, and I think somebody mentioned this as well. So freeze the user.
Yeah.
But you're still using a license for
Right.
that, so they can't log in secure, but it won't break your schedule.
Right. And that's what we have. We have our
Yeah.
account frozen.
Vote for this idea on the idea exchange. So I think I mentioned this. Let's see when this was created. It's probably like 10 years ago. Okay. Let's see. Change running schedule. This was, oh, they don't tell you when. Oh, posted in 2015. Okay. So 7 years ago, right around the other, the time period is that other comments that people were making. This idea or this. Okay.
That last one that you talked about, changing the email address, is also listed on there. Says it works, but it's not a good idea.
Yeah, again, it kind of goes back to the freeze user idea at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Listening to the questions that have been asked today, they're awesome. It's just that I think that for a lot of people that might be new to Salesforce coming in here thinking, holy crap, I have no idea what they're talking about, anything. None of this makes any sense. I'm in the wrong place. Can we just reassure them that they're not in the wrong place, that if you've got a question, ask the question. We're all here to help. So
yeah, no, that's a great point, Steve. So just to put a finer point on that. So the main purpose of this call is just to have a live forum to ask a question. So it could be a very simple question or an overly complex question that I'll fumble around and then not be able to give you an answer on. So the goal is that we answer as many questions as we can. Some of them I'll try to take homework and see if I can figure it out, and then I'll post something in our group on LinkedIn. And then if you're asking a question and you went away and you kind of solved your own question, I would love for people to kind of come back and walk us through what the solution was. But yeah, definitely don't feel like these are the typical questions that we get. Usually we're talking about basic admin stuff, flows within Salesforce. We're not talking about code or building integrations or things like that, but those are still valid questions and we'll help if we can, but that's not the typical. So
Sorry.
no worries at all. Thanks for derailing the call, Sandy. Appreciate it. So, no, that's fine. So with that, we'll open it back up. Does anybody have any questions on anything whatsoever?
I have an update real quick. For what we were trying to do earlier, I ended up just going to sharing settings, copying, highlighting and copying all of the list of objects and sharing settings, putting it into an Excel sheet, which returned exactly what I was looking for. But that's just because of the way it was laid out on the page, that it was easy to do that. But I wanted to let you know that when I compared it to the query with the extra bits that you added to it, there was only a difference of 8 lines. So it really did weed out a lot because I had 800 and something to begin with.
No, that's good. Sometimes anybody that has worked with me in the past, I do have a habit of over engineering things sometimes. So sometimes the old copy and paste in Excel is the way to go. So nothing wrong with that if that works. Usually the challenge that I have is you copy and paste it and then you get like all the extra weird like link, like edit, pipe, delete tags, and you got to clean it up and everything else. But if it works, it works. So
it was just a lucky try.
Nice. All right, cool. What else then? Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Bill, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Bill.
Because apparently I can't show up here and not have questions. Steve, thank you. When I'm very new to Salesforce and I come here a lot of times just for the jargon. If the first place I hear a word or phrase or a capability is here, then I don't get a blank stare when I'm actually working. What I'm trying to do today is, let me emphasize this strongly, just for practice, for my own practice of getting clicks in, trying to put together an app. So think of actually, I'm a coach at a CrossFit gym. So I'm thinking, well, what could I do? What could I do Salesforce wise for this gym? And we're trying on one side, trying to do some, maybe manage some sales. Cause right now the way sales work is if somebody comes in and the gym manager's not there, I'm literally writing a name and a phone number on a Post-it and handing it,
Yeah.
Putting it on her computer. So I would want coaches to have some way on their phone or an iPad to put in a little bit more detail for a lead. I'm also looking to have, and this might be too far to go, but to have members sign up for a class. So I've got to have, on Mondays, I've got 5 classes that are an hour each, and same with Tuesday, Wednesday, what have you. Have a schedule for people to sign up in, and then during that class, coaches can go on the iPad and confirm that they've been scheduled. Or confirm that they were there. And then I guess I'm looking for any other simple capability in Salesforce to add some capability to this scenario. And again, it's completely just for my practice. So Bill, your idea, sure, but if anybody else has just some simple ideas of what I can add into this scenario to practice, I would be eternally grateful.
So I have a few thoughts, but we'll open it up. Does anybody have any thoughts on what you might leverage in Salesforce for that use case before I throw my idea out there?
Hey, Bill, what's your current data model? Like, how are you currently logging, coaches and what people are attending each class?
In reality, the gym uses a different CRM.
Okay.
So I'm just, again, this is just for my own practice, but as if I were starting from, as if the gym was starting from zero with Salesforce.
Okay. And you haven't built like any custom objects or anything yet?
I've done nothing.
Okay.
I've written some things on a piece of paper.
I mean, initially, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cody.
Initially, I'm just thinking about how you would want to relate it. So if you could have a relationship of, trying to think, you would have to be able to group or have a custom object for classes and then relate those contacts to that object. Maybe have a lookup relationship between or have a lookup field on your class's custom object that would relate that contact, or maybe a screen flow for a specific class that looks up all contacts that are currently active or not, and then you'd be able to add people to that specific class, and just kind of have your coach walk it through that way. I mean, that's an idea. I don't know if that's out of the realm, but that's kind of my initial thought. Bill,
Yes.
please.
Yeah. So Cody, I think, when we start talking about the data model, I guess there's one really important thing to consider, right? So, you think about building out different use cases in Salesforce for a gym or for, other types of use cases. There's the creating the data model, there's creating the UI to let people interact with it. But the challenge is always going to be, well, these people have licenses, right? So like, can they actually get into Salesforce to interact with this stuff? Or do we have a community, like a public community that you might be able to leverage? So there's that part of it, which if you wanted to put this in practice and actually get it leveraged, you're going to have to address that licensing piece, or how do the people actually get access? So setting that aside, if we just assume that every one of these folks that goes to this gym has a Salesforce license, and you wanted to build something in Salesforce to help them, manage, what are the available classes and whether or not they signed up. For me, whether you do it through the standard Salesforce UI or Experience Cloud, would be, you have your class object, you have class attendees as, something underneath of that. Creating either a screen flow or a lightning web component where, get a list of classes that, like, I, as the user that's logged in, it could see what classes am I signed up for. So you could query that and display it to the user, like, here's my classes, and they could see the schedule when they're coming up. You could have classes I'm not signed up for that would be available, where you can have a button that says sign up, and they click that and it creates one of those line items, and then from the person that's in charge of the class perspective, it's a little bit easier for them because we're not talking about custom development with Lightning Web Components or flows. You could literally just go to the class record and you would look at the related list under that, and you would be able to see, all the people that have signed up for it. So again, I think there's two different pieces. There's the, how would I design this as an application in Salesforce, with the data and the UI elements and all that stuff. And then there's going to be that other piece, like security and access and everything else that might be a little bit harder to do. So.
Yeah, I'm
totally
I'm
agree.
looking at it maybe as iterations like we would normally do, right? So
Yeah.
the easy part would be to get it set up. And then the follow on would be, how do I get these 100 people who are members in the gym to interact?
Yeah. So what I think what you're doing though is actually really great, and especially for folks. And I mention this on calls all the time, that one of the best ways to learn Salesforce is to take a use case that you're passionate about and just try to build something that addresses that. Right. So I mentioned this before, like I have a wine brewing app that I keep track of. There's keep track of exercises at the gym. You create an app that you keep track of all your stuff. Whatever it is, right? COVID outbreak tracker I had back in early 2020, like a lot of people tried to create, all kinds of stuff, right? So you can create it in Salesforce. So this is a great use case. And if you just go into the assumption that folks will be able to have a license and you build the app, that's a great way to learn. But yeah, I think my gut would say that you would start with a class object. You have a class attendees object that's related to it. And then it's just a matter of creating that, nice UI that people can actually sign up for it without having to go through tabs in Salesforce. You'd want to develop something, I would think, through Experience Cloud, where, it's just like a website they would go to and they can see those nice little widgets, like things I'm signed up for, available classes coming up, and go from there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. Just so the question I have then, just kind of thinking, if this was real world, would I be able to put a link to that Experience Cloud, say, on the gym's website?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could even go so far as to say you could run the gym's website through Experience Cloud. There's a lot of companies that do that. But that's kind of a bear in and of itself, as far as Experience Cloud, the different varieties, what you can do, authenticated versus non-authenticated users. But generally speaking, you could run a full-blown corporate website through Experience Cloud.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Would I be able to hop on there and say, and create a very basic generic website that's never going to be on the internet, but I can practice with?
Yeah. And just to keep it simple. So one thing that you might do, for an example, there's a Trailhead module, and I could search for it real quick, but there's a Trailhead module about Experience Cloud on how to build like a personal resume site, right? So you can build that on Experience Cloud, where people can see like projects you've worked on, a little bit about you, your history, pictures, things like that. You build it on Experience Cloud, but when you would want to send them to that, it would have a URL like developer.force.com/ whatever your name is, whatever, right? So it's a kind of a weird address, but there's nothing saying that you can't build that in a developer edition org on Salesforce. Go to Google Domains or GoDaddy or whatever it is, get a domain called, my CrossFit custom site, and then do a URL redirect that just, when they go to that nice, pretty URL, it just redirects them to the other one, to your Experience Cloud site. So all things you can absolutely do that. Create kind of a site that, people can access, public site, and
yeah, great. Okay, good. Those are some good ideas. I'm literally starting from a piece of paper at this point. So
yeah, and just one final point, and then I want to get to Pearl's question, because I think now that I'm looking at the chat, she asked it like 40 minutes ago, so we'll jump to that. But the one thing you might consider, just to kind of get started, to Cody's point, if you create that class object and you create your class attendees, or maybe even just start with the class object, the class name, what it is, the time, all that kind of stuff. Then focus a little bit on Experience Cloud about creating kind of public facing experience site where you can actually take that class object and, show a list of upcoming classes on a public forum. So you can manage your classes in Salesforce and your standard objects, custom objects, all that stuff, but display it publicly to users, in a nice little UI where you won't have to do any coding or anything. You can just, do it through Experience Cloud, with a list view or related list, or not related list, but like a list view of upcoming classes where the date is greater than today, and just display that publicly.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So something to consider.
Give it a try. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to go back to Pearl's question. So I'd like to know about Salesforce implementation project plan. As far as I know, it really depends on SIs, no standard Salesforce methodology, different phases, again, no standard. So Pearl, anything you want to add to your question before I make a whole bunch of assumptions and potentially not answer your question at all?
I apologize. This is a very general, very broad question. It's not really specific configuration question. So I'm in a course about an experience, like doing a project to experience different part of Salesforce, but more on the very high level project, how to do a project plan, including stakeholder interview, user story persona, business process mapping, and then we would move on to the design phase to talk about how to build a reference architect diagram.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I don't have much of a problem about the technical side because I can find information in the architect site in Salesforce. The problem is more the one that I talk about is like a week one. It's very broad. And I kind of see some of the Salesforce implementation project plan. I Google it a lot. It's a huge documentation. Some of them are huge, like 25 to 30 pages. It doesn't really, how should I say, there's no standard, right? So some people refer to 7 stages or phases, and I break it down to 5 in general, but I just kind of a little bit, because my team fell through. So I don't have anyone to work with me. I don't have anyone to bounce off idea with me. So I just do everything on my own. And I go to the class and then I see people have a group and they build something 25 pages. I'm just lost. So I just want to get some idea in general, how do an SI would come in and take on a project plan and what do they consider. Then I get some idea. I just need someone to bounce off idea with me so I can do it on my own. Does it make sense?
It does, yeah. So just to restate your question, and then we'll open it up if folks have feedback. So basically, as a Salesforce, when we say SI, we're talking about like an implementation partner, somebody that would go into a company that does not have Salesforce, get all their requirements, get all their use cases, and then come up with a plan to actually implement Salesforce for them. So as far as that plan or what questions you should ask or how the different phases should be broken up, does anybody have any feedback? This is a little bit out of my day-to-day, but anybody have any thoughts there?
It sounds like this is very centered around like what a BA does when you're talking about what are, gathering, what are the requirements, what are the processes that they're doing. And this is, I was just a BA on my last project, but before I go any further, Pearl, does that sound kind of similar?
Cody, that is the title of the course, Admin BA Quest. But I take on the perspective as a consultant because I like to be a consultant down the road. Mm-hmm. So it's a flip of mine that I just try to do it like a consultant. But if what you said is correct, then guide me through because I don't have experience on both sides.
That's totally fine. That's totally fine. So I'm a consultant, and the whole idea of being a BA is your main job is to solve their problem, right? So the main goal of the BA is to really dig and look at their processes, do you have any discovery documents that you've been able to like read through and understand their current process and maybe understand their pain points?
We have a very vague business scenario. It's about the sales process, but pretty much we can tweak it any way we want. We can say it's a lead conversion issue. So it's a very simple sales process, lead conversion. They gave out the two persona, SDR as well as sales rep. Then we can either follow or we can create our own. So anything is possible. There's no grading. That's what they said. So it's kind of experience how to make it work. That's very open wide scenario. Nothing too specific, like you don't know how to configure, how to create an object. It's not like that. So that's kind of make me, it actually shocked me because I'm not used to that kind of training because I've been doing Salesforce, very specific. I don't know whether I'm making sense to you.
No. Yeah. I mean, this is probably the best case scenario as a BA because there's very little stuff that you have to kind of worry about breaking, especially if it's like a green pasture type of org, meaning that it's a pretty clean slate you're working with. But I would say the best things to focus on are really talking with the client and understanding, really understanding their process, and then look for ways on how you can like listen for really repetitive tasks, listen for like, if it's a really simple sales process, the sales process seems like it's not the main pain point, but maybe, are they, is there certain people they need to notify with a sale? Can you make that through a chatter notification, or can you, do something through a flow or anything like that? So I would just say as the BA, really listen for those ways that you can just improve the process, because it sounds like there isn't much like architecture you need to build, if I'm understanding correctly. And with that, you now have the ability to just kind of play and tweak and show them what Salesforce can do, instead of taking a very, very rigid process and putting it into Salesforce, which is what I had to do for my last implementation. It's, you now have the ability to kind of play and open up Salesforce to the client, which will, make them happy as well. Does that, am I on the right track?
I'm actually totally with you like that. I got hesitate is because when I went to the class yesterday, someone show his project plan for feedback, and he come up with 25 pages of project plan that has not, it's not what you and I are talking about, understanding the user, finding way to build it better. It's not like that. It's talking about the project objective, and then there's resources, there's signature pages. That is the part that I was kind of like, wait a minute. All this time, we were not really talking like that in the class, as far as I know. But then all of a sudden, I see someone building a project plan. There's no flow there to talk about how, where the project is not working, how you move along the flow diagram. There's no such thing. Everything just a very, it's not SOW even. It just a very much a documentation, writing a project plan. So I was just not sure why all of a sudden I'm seeing another team is doing such a lengthy 25 pages documentation, and it's not touching the point about what you and I understand that would be a BA doing, and that's what previously the coaches are talking. And I went back to the Slack channel I asked the question. I said, based on what I saw today's class, it seems we are still doing something about the project plan. And then I got shut down by the founder. Oops, we have to edit this one. That he said, well, we have already, the project should be done, and we move on to UAT, which is next week, a third week thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit not sure. Then, we are week 2 yesterday, and then someone is showing the project plan. So I, based on the class, I'm like, it seems like deviate from what my understanding is. But then now you said the project plan is set and done. So you see, my confusion is like bouncing back and forth. And I compare the course outline. I actually create my own outline, so I can follow what they said. I extract the content. And I was so sure that in week 2, we still talk about project plan, but in a different phase that they call a design phase. So I'm like, well, I just want to make sure it's this week they removed the reference architect diagram because some people just find it too complicated to build it. So they struck it. So this week, actually, we don't do the technical part. So that person probably go back to look at his project plan and just to make sure he got it right. So my understanding is more related to what you said. So my way of doing it is not like doing this kind of lengthy 25 pages project plan documentation that way. I'm just basing on, okay, if we have the stakeholder interview, then based on what we hear that what the client need is, then we just build along something along the line, and then we build a flow diagram to show it. We do the maybe some documentation like user story, how the user story we come up with based on the persona, and then we map the business process and show the flow diagram, very simple one. So that's what I was thinking, because I'm actually one person doing the whole project, right? So for the time and depth and understanding, I finally decided I'm not gonna use fancy tool like Trello, all that, because by the time, and then Jira is completely, I log in and I just completely lost how to use it and too complicated. So I just thought that, well, if I can just build something very simple, but to show I have the basic understanding, I think that is, for me, I passed the experience. That's what I want. I want to have just some sort of idea, and I can build something and show I have a clear understanding. As far as fancy tool, that to me is not necessary at this point. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So Pearl, one thing, a couple things actually. One, we are over time, but I'm going to hang out here because there was a few other questions. If anybody has other questions they want to get to, I'm going to hang out for a little bit. Two, I think the last thing you mentioned there, you're right on the money as far as like the project plans. I see this all the time where people get like, they worry about the tool they're going to use to create the project plan with, as opposed to the actual meat of what the plan is, right? So we're going to create this most amazing TaskRay project board, or we're going to create a Trello board, or all this other kind of stuff. Sometimes you just got to, even a Word doc where you're just coming up with a list of what needs to get done, what are the different phases, how we're going to break it up, and get all the information in that. That's usually a lot of times a better way to go, and not get so wrapped up in what is the tool we're going to use and how do we link tasks together in the tool and all that kind of stuff. I would definitely, I think that's the way to go. But when it comes to the class, I might suggest bringing that up either, to whoever the instructors are, maybe ask the other team directly. Because again, I don't think these classes are really a competition, so to speak, in that they should be more than willing to share their work, and then maybe you can compare and see what works for you. I think that's what it comes down to, is what works for you. So
thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah. All right, cool. So like I said, we are a little bit over, but does anybody have any questions? I did see there was one question about a data dictionary. Who was asking that question? Let me see.
That was me. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what do you, basically you just need to get a list of objects and all the fields that are in those objects? Or
Yeah, so there's a way to do that easily within the database. Like I can do it in SQL Server very easily, just look at the information schema. But just the name and like data type, data length, if it's nullable, not only in standard, but custom objects.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this might take a bit, and I'd have to fumble through this, but I've just started going through the process of building a tool to deploy to my customers where they can actually, with a single click of a button, create objects and create fields and things like that for our app. And one of the things that we were using was, I think it was mentioned earlier, the tooling API. That might be the way to go. There's definitely ways that you can actually use tooling API to actually pull that information out of Salesforce. And to your point, it's got all the different attributes about the objects. You can even get details about the fields, and you should be able to spit it out in like a JSON format, where you can then consume in a variety
Tooling
of different
API
places.
again, was that running SQL through the interface?
No, this isn't necessarily SQL. This is like, and here, let me just see if I can get a quick example of this. Salesforce tooling API pull all objects. Let's see if I can find this here. Object namespaces, introducing resource examples. Here we go. This is what I was looking for. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, so this might be another one of those where I might have to come back. But anybody else on the call have anything they've already done before I kind of spin my wheels and try to copy my example and send it to you? Because you need not just the object, but the underlying fields for those objects as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the basics, like if I had to list it out, here's the table, here's the fields, and just kind of go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the tooling API has that. Of course, you can always pull stuff out through the metadata API as well. The only challenge there is it's not going to be in a pretty format like a table of any kind. It's going to be like metadata, in a folder structure with like XML that you'd have to kind of parse through. And just to curious, what's the goal of this? Like, what are you using this for?
Here's an example of what I did in SQL Server, but the use case is to know our tables, know our fields within our architecture, because we have multiple sources and we're trying to integrate between them, build a data warehouse. So we need to know the fields and what's going to sync, what's our plan for it. So, but in SQL, you can just go to the table schemas and just output, here's the column name, here's the type, here's the maximum length. It's just a very simple SQL call. And I'm surprised Salesforce doesn't have something like that, or you could just do it. There might be, I'm new, whether it's through an API call or through a SQL call. But
yeah, so I'm trying to see here. I'm literally fumbling through this to see if I can just get you an example of what this might look like. All right, so here we go.
Do it later if I can follow up sometime.
Yeah, let me just share my screen very quickly. I'll show you this, but for some reason my share link is like gone. Oh, there it is. Okay, share. Here we go. So this is what I was referring to with doing it through, in this case, the REST API, right? So, I'll share these links with you in the chat, but essentially using Workbench, the tool that we had used earlier, they have this utility for REST Explorer. So what I have here is basically, I just did a query against all the S objects, and S objects is equivalent to like an object or a table in SQL, right?
Yeah.
So for each of these, you can query them. And then if I drill into this, it gives you kind of all the nullable and queryable and all that kind of stuff. And then I believe there's a way that you can modify this request where it'll include things like you said, like all the underlying fields and everything else as well. And then I believe, again, that I should be able to do a raw response. And then this is a JSON format, which you can then consume in any kind of, JSON to table type, tool that's out there. So it's ugly, but it might be a way to get you there.
All right. Yeah. I love some links. Thanks.
Yeah. So I just wish that there was a cleaner way to do this. Here we go. Fields, account, describe. Okay. So that's individual objects. But anyway, maybe a place to get started. So I'll throw this in the chat. And I'll also in my notes here, I might treat this one as a homework one as well, just to figure it out. Like if you want to export all fields and objects, how would you do that? So
Thank you.
yeah. The other thing too to maybe consider, there's tools out there, like if you're not familiar with Snapshot, have you ever heard of these tools on the App Exchange, where they can actually pull all your objects and things. And then the other one you might want to look at too is there are certain parts of GDPR that require companies to keep a list of all their objects and fields where they're keeping track of NPI and other kind of private information. So there's apps on the App Exchange you might want to look at for like a data library where they've done all that work for you. They're doing all the calls, they're doing all the queries and everything for the underlying tables or metadata, and they put it into a simple Salesforce UI where you can then interact with it, create your own custom fields, put review dates and checkboxes and all that kind of stuff. Where if you're just trying to get a handle on what fields have been created and why and what they're used for, that might be a way to do it through one of those kind of data library type apps.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. I know we're way over here. I think as far as answering questions, I'm at about a 20% today. So not my best showing, but it is a holiday weekend. So with that, hope everybody has a great long weekend if you're in the US, and we'll catch up next week. Thanks all.